블리츠스케일이 그러면 아시아 마켓에서는 어떻게 유용한지, 그리고 블리츠스케일의 한계는 무엇인지, 그 두 가지에 중점적으로 질의응답을 해볼 거고요. 그리고 마지막에 시간이 남는다면은 청중에게 질문도 받아서 제가 번역을 해서 질문을 해볼 생각입니다. So, Chris, thank you very much for your insightful talk. In the following 10 minutes or so, I'll be asking a few questions on Bltizscaling, especially in terms of how it relates to the Asian market and the limits of it. So, the first question is on the Asian market, but before I do that, I must admit, I'm a big fan of the book.
Thank you.
My personal favorite is one where you emphasize prioritizing speed over efficiency in times of uncertainty while embracing risk. I memorized word to word.
I love it.
So, I love it because at a glance, that feels counterintuitive, but the more you think about it, the more you realize that's how the Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Airbnb, all these tech giants dominate the industry. They nip their competitors in the bud by leveraging what you call the first scalar advantage. Well, I have one question though. One of the things that I noticed as I read your book was that those successful cases of Bltizscaling, they were mostly Western. But as you know, just like ourselves written, we have Asian companies who are thriving on the Asian market. Not only in Korea, but also in Japan, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, etc. So that begs the first question. What would be different for an Asian company to Bltizscale as opposed to Western companies?
Absolutely. So, in thinking about blitzscaling and Western companies, in many ways we're talking primarily about American companies. And American companies have the advantage of an extremely large domestic market and an extremely large English language internet. So it is basically scaling on easy mode because you can begin a domestic market that allows you to get to scale, and you can scale without necessarily tackling all the language issues as quickly. So of course it is easy. But the fact that it is easier doesn't mean that it is a more durable advantage. In fact, if you go to other markets, you may have a more durable advantage because as you grow and grow into multiple markets, multiple languages, as you build your own infrastructure, you may have more of a competitive advantage over any new entrant that comes in. You'll notice that in the United States, so many of our very famous companies have actually toppled as well. A company like General Electric, once the world's most valuable company, is now an also-ran. This happens all the time in America and perhaps a little less in other countries. I think the other thing that's really important to recognize is it's a question of orientation towards the present and the future. So it is clear that Asia is the future of mankind. Only 13% of the population of the world lives in the Americas, and only 18%, I think, live in the Americas or Europe. I think Asia represents almost 80% of the world's population, and most of that is within a 7 or 8 hour plane ride of here. And most of the growth is going to take place in the future in Latin America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia. So I think that Asian companies have the advantage of geography, cultural proximity for this emerging market that is growing. But it is going to be harder because it is much more fragmented than the English language market typically is there.
So language in Asia is fragmented as opposed to all the Romance languages in Western. And I think you also mentioned that there's also durability issues. So I think that covers the first question. Moving on to the second one that I prepared, and it's on the innovator's dilemma. And for the audience who don't know, let me introduce what this is. Innovator's dilemma is one where more established firms have a harder time innovating because they want stability. I think Google is a prime example of this because, they're the ones who invented transformers, which is what fundamentally powers these large language models. It is a T of GPT, as you mentioned, but it is the OpenAI who hit the market first, and I must say, in a spectacular way with ChatGPT. Google was the one who was beating the bush, but OpenAI cast the bird. So this might be a concern for those who want to blitzscale, because once you successfully blitzscale, you will have accomplished many things, and therefore you would like to secure things, and therefore you suddenly start to refrain from taking risk, which is no good because that is a direct opposition to the thesis of blitzscaling. It's all about embracing risk. So The last question I have for you is, how should Bltizscaling companies cope with the innovator's dilemma once they successfully Blitzscale?
Excellent question. And this is true both of startups that have grown and scaled, as well as established company. I know obviously here in Seoul and in Korea overall, there are very established, very powerful companies that are trying to figure out how they're going to deal with their AI transformations as well. So in thinking about this, the fact is that the desire to have stability, to protect what you already have, is just human nature. If you've already succeeded, your goal is to hold on to that success, as opposed to taking new risks. And so that's why it's really critical to organize your company in a way that allows and incentivizes people to take on new risks. So in a big company, one of the big issues is if there's a new initiative and some executive gets attached to it, they're going to try to get as much budget as possible to increase the chances of success. But in fact, as we know from the venture capital model, the right way is to have a lot of smaller companies, a lot of smaller initiatives, all of which are higher risk individually, but collectively are almost certain to produce some sort of incredible result. Same holds true if you're a startup that you become big. Just because you were a startup 15 years ago doesn't mean you're not a big company today. Google was the scrappy startup in 1999, and we just talked about how 25 years later, they have the most incredible technology that mankind has ever built, and they failed to capitalize on it. So the fact that you were innovative doesn't mean you are innovative. You have to continue to develop small teams that have the flexibility to fail. And only by having small teams that have the flexibility to fail are you going to actually pursue things that are innovative and different and higher risk.
So you have to be kept alerted and probably monitor how you're dealing with the innovative mindset. Okay. So I think that covers all the questions I prepared. I will turn attention to the audience if there are any questions that you have. I think there's one on the front with a black shirt.